What if the greatest betrayal in royal history wasn't against a kingdom, but against blood itself? Imagine a king so desperate for power, so consumed by survival, that he turned his own dynasty into currency, not metaphorically, literally. He sold marriages, futures, even childhoods. And for a moment it worked. But at what cost? In 13th century England, the crown sat on fragile ground. King Henry III ruled from towering stone castles and candlelit halls. But behind the grandeur was something far less stable. Debt, fear, and a kingdom slipping through his fingers. To his people, Henry was devout, cultured, even refined. He rebuilt Westminster Abbey. He surrounded himself with art, religion, and ceremony. But admiration can hide a darker truth, because beneath the gold and prayer, his power was crumbling. England was under constant pressure. Foreign threats loomed. Barons grew restless. Money drained faster than it could be collected. And Henry had a problem no king could ignore. He needed control, and he needed it fast. But here's what most people don't know. In medieval Europe, royal blood wasn't just family, it was leverage. And Henry understood that better than anyone. At first, the signs were subtle. Quiet deals, private negotiations, arranged marriages, nothing unusual for royalty. Kings had always used alliances to secure peace. But then everything changed. Henry began selling something far more disturbing. The futures of his own bloodline, under a system known as wardship. The king had the legal right to control young heirs when their fathers died. He decided who they married. He controlled their lands. And more importantly, he could sell those rights. And Henry did, repeatedly. Children of noble families, some as young as 7 or 8, were treated like assets. Their marriages auctioned to the highest bidder. Their lives decided in cold negotiations between powerful men. But that wasn't the worst part. Historians believe Henry didn't stop at noble children. He used his own family the same way. His daughter, Margaret of England, became a bargaining chip in a high-stakes political game. At just 11 years old, she was married off to Alexander III of Scotland, not for love, not for her future, but for peace, for leverage, for survival. Imagine being a child raised in a palace, told you're part of something sacred, a dynasty, a legacy, and then one day you're handed over like a contract. No choice, no voice, just a signature that seals your fate. And Margaret wasn't alone. Henry arranged marriages across his extended family, forging alliances with foreign powers, securing loyalty through blood ties. Each deal strengthened his position, but weakened something deeper, trust, because while the crown grew stronger on paper, the kingdom itself began to fracture. Barons saw what was happening. They weren't blind. Their own children were being sold into alliances they didn't choose. Their lands controlled by royal decree. Their futures dictated by a king who seemed more interested in power than loyalty. That's when everything unraveled. In 1258, a group of powerful barons forced Henry to accept a series of reforms known as the Provisions of Oxford. It was, in essence, a rebellion without swords, an attempt to strip the king of absolute authority. And at the center of their anger, control. Control over lands, control over power, and control over bloodlines. Because Henry's system, his manipulation of marriages and heirs, had crossed a line. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was exploitation. The tension exploded into what history now calls the Second Barons' War. Castles burned. Armies marched. The kingdom descended into chaos. All because a king tried to hold power by selling the very thing that defined it, his legacy. But here's where it gets even darker. Even after facing rebellion, even after being forced to share power, Henry never fully abandoned his tactics. The system he used, treating bloodlines as currency, continued long after his reign, because it worked. In the short term, at least, he kept his throne. He maintained alliances. He survived. But survival isn't the same as victory. By the time Henry's reign ended, the monarchy had changed forever. The absolute power of the king was broken. Parliament began to rise. The idea that a ruler could control every aspect of his subjects' lives, including their families, was no longer unquestioned, and historians still debate his legacy. Was he a weak king, forced into desperate decisions, or a calculating ruler who knew exactly what he was doing? The truth is probably somewhere in between. But one thing is certain. He turned blood into bargaining chips. He traded loyalty for control. And in doing so, he planted the seeds of rebellion within his own kingdom, because power built on betrayal doesn't last. And a dynasty built on transactions isn't really a family at all. He kept his crown. He secured his alliances. But in the end, he didn't just sell his bloodline. He changed what it meant to be royal, forever.